I wasn't always alone, at least since the outbreak. My wife and I survived the initial wave of what I guess you'd call them zombies. Every day is hell. It's impossible to stay vigilant 24/7. We were getting attacked every time we'd set up camp to rest. We got good at making booby traps, and one of us would keep watch in about 3-hour increments, but we'd always wake the other if more than a handful of zombies showed up. Until that goddamn night. I woke up from what I thought was my worst nightmare into my actual worst nightmare. I barreled through the zombies on top of her, but not even my sawed-off shotgun was quick enough. She'd only been scratched a handful of times, but had a gnarly bite out of her calf muscle. We dressed all her wounds and truly believed we'd gotten through the worst of it. Until days later, she started getting weaker. We had some rope and she decided it'd be best if we restrained her while I slept, in fear of the worst. My turns to take short naps got less and less, until she told me to kiss her with my mouth closed and my eyes opened. Once I did, she blew her brains out with my sawed-off shotgun. I didn't move from that spot for days, except for turning to kill approaching zombies. Just having to look at my wife's motionless body. I couldn't touch her headless corpse. I haven't slept since. You can't sleep when zombie noises are your lullaby. Days later, I started digging a hole where I was standing, and once I had it deep enough, I touched my wife's body for the first time. I placed her in a hole, and I picked up the sawed-off shotgun she used to blow her brains out. I sat there looking at it for a minute, but it felt like hours. I couldn't use that gun anymore. I threw it in the hole next to my wife and buried them. It took me weeks before I found another shotgun under an old truck nearby town. I hadn't seen many zombies since my wife's death. Maybe they were giving me a break, or maybe they knew I was pissed. My new life's goal, my only reason for living. Kill as many of those fucking things as I can before I die. I'd grown fond of the idea of dying alone. The world was all shit now anyways. One night while we're surveying a small city, I noticed this teen boy, and I followed him for a mile or so outside of the city to a cabin. It had a little moat around it. I noticed him setting up traps around his unique campsite. I was only following the boy out of curiosity, because I hadn't seen another human in months. He seemed like a nice kid at the time. I waited on the edge of the city searching for supplies, but keeping a close eye on the boy's cabin. I set up a white flag on the edge of the city, hoping he'd see it or come back to town. When it rains, it pours. Or so I thought. An old friend I had known back in college, John Williams, came up to my white flag. What are the odds? Not seeing another human for months, and then seeing two in less than 24 hours. One even being from my former life before the outbreak. John and I caught up. We talked with loved ones lost, and he mostly asked questions. Something felt off about the whole conversation. He convinced me to take a little nap when we set up camp on our rooftop that night. How could I have been so trusting so quickly? I woke up struggling to get loose from ropes that had been tied around my wrists and ankles. The teen boy I had earlier wanted to help, now standing over me, talking to John. They had robbed me of everything useful I had and left me tied up for dead. I guess life before the outbreak wasn't so different after all. Never trust anybody. At least they had left me on top of a building. Tied up anywhere else, and they'd basically be trying to get me pulled apart by zombies. Days pass. Besides the occasional ant I'd eat that would crawl in front of my face. I knew I'd most likely die from dehydration first, but the hunger pains weren't helping. Thankfully, less than a week into my bondage, there was a massive rain, but I was able to drink enough rainwater to sustain myself. I was nearly tied up a month, eating bugs and drinking rain, driving myself insane. Finally, I heard movement in the stairwell that led up to the rooftop. I started to yell for help, flopping like a fish. I already felt dead, but I was fighting to survive. The door on the rooftop started to move like somebody was pushing on it. Why couldn't they open it, I thought. John and the teenage boy didn't lock it. At least I thought not. Fuck, was my immediate next thought. The door busted open, and there I lay helpless, looking directly at a zombie. The zombie lunged at me as I tried to roll away, like it was possible to escape, but I was doomed. It locked its jaw on my forearm, but I wasn't going down without a fight. Struggling with my restraints, the zombie latched its mouth tighter on my forearm. I could feel the giant chunk of my forearm getting ripped off by the zombie's bite. It made enough room in my restraints to pull my good arm free. Losing a lot of blood, I literally had no energy. I mustered all I had remaining, all the strength grabbing the zombie's head and slamming it into the ground. Again and again, everything went red, and I could see my wife blowing her brains out. I came back to reality as I felt the zombie's brains explode through the skull on the concrete. I laid there motionless for a moment, contemplating how long I had left before I died or turned into one of those things. I had to fight harder now. I freed my ankle restraints and went down the stairs to a saw I remember seeing before John had led me up to the rooftop. I figured I had no chance otherwise. I grabbed the saw and started hacking away at my bicep on the arm that the zombie had taken a chunk out of. It took a few minutes to fully detach. And for the longest minutes of my life, I used a shirt to wrap the nub, and I knew I had to cauterize it soon. I gathered supplies to treat my giant open hole in my arm. I knew two things. I was going to survive and get revenge. Now this little nub of mine wasn't always so pretty. I had to collect a shit ton of material. Old shirts, bandanas, just any old material I could find around the city. I made a makeshift bag gathering all my supplies, but my wound kept reopening, and I was trailing massive amounts of blood. I passed out a couple of times, coming to in time to avoid getting torn apart. I had to run many times, but a huge horde of zombies was now on my trail. I had an idea to lead this continuously growing horde of zombies to the cabin with the moat that the young boy had led me to a month prior. I had found a small hose I had gathered with my supplies. Running out of the city towards the cabin, I looked back to see well over 50 of those bastards trailing me. It took me a minute because running with half an arm for the first time is hard. Once I made it to the cabin, I jumped in the moat and submerged myself, using the hose as a snorkel. I swam around to the side to avoid the traps I had seen the teenager place in the moat a month prior. I waited under the water a couple minutes until I saw the bridge being lowered. I peeked my eyes over the water to see John using my shotgun to blast through the approaching horde of zombies. I lifted myself onto the bridge with my good arm and snuck into the cabin. On the wall was a giant lever for the bridge. Having one arm made it very difficult, but not impossible. As I was closing the cabin, outside John turned and noticed me. I wish I still had my other hand so I could have flipped him the bird. I remember how good that used to feel. Noticing me must have distracted him enough to, once the first one grabbed him, he was a goner. I found my .45 pistol and moved the chair in front of the door and sat there to wait for the teenage boy. I heard the teenage boy screams, followed by more gunshots. After a little silence, the door lowered into the bridge, and I shot that little fuck right between the eyes.